Ron Paul is here.
It's true, you know. Ron Paul is here. First guest today on Antiwar Radio, Dr. Ron Paul. He's a former Air Force flight surgeon and an obstetrician by trade. He's a 10-term congressman from District 14 on the Gulf Coast. He's the author of the books Gold, Peace, and Prosperity, The Case for Gold, Mises and Austrian Economics, Freedom Under Siege, A Republic If You Can Keep It, and A Foreign Policy of Freedom. He's currently running for President of the United States of America. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Scott. Nice to be with you.
Oh, it's so good to have you back on the show. And I have to tell you, we're all very excited about all the hype, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. All the thousands and thousands, maybe millions of people who are being turned on to the message of liberty due to your recent efforts. I guess my real question, in terms of your presidential campaign so far, is: are you having fun?
It is. It's really rewarding to know that there's so many people interested. I'd like to take all the credit for it, but to tell you the truth, I think there have been a lot of seeds planted over the last decade or two to get so many people interested. But now that we're getting some attention for this message, it's very, very pleasing to find so many new people willing to come in. And sometimes it's young people bringing in their parents and vice versa. So it is really exciting. It is a tedious job, but we've been at this before, and it's always been at a much lower key. Since I've been doing this for 30 years, we've never quite seen the interest expressed by so many people, and I think the Internet has a lot to do with that. And, of course, radio is helping out a whole lot, and maybe one day we will get the mainstream media talking about freedom and the Constitution.
Well, as far as spokesman for individualism and liberty and limited government in this country, you are the best of them, and you shouldn't sell yourself short. It's has a lot to do with the messenger, and people can tell that you mean what you say, you're consistent, you follow the principles that you preach, and people can tell that you really mean it. That's why they take you so seriously.
Well, thank you.
Now, let's talk foreign policy. The last time we spoke, you mentioned repeatedly that the costs of the wars were going to come back and haunt us. Is that what's beginning to happen now?
Yeah, I think so. Those of us who remember very clearly the 60s and the 70s, of course, I was in the Air Force during the 60s, and back then Johnson reassured the public, and he said that it doesn't matter. You can have guns and you can have butter. Otherwise, in other words, you can run a huge military operation in a welfare state and expand it and don't worry about it. Well, he was completely wrong, because the 70s were very, very hectic, and we had a lot of inflation, and we had a very weak economy, and the dollar was on the ropes and was rescued at the end of that decade, barely, but all the metals and commodity prices were soaring. And then things have settled down, but once again, in the last 10 years, we've been back at it again. I mean, the conservatives have been elected to cut back on the size of government, and government keeps expanding. The entitlement system is exploding. And now we have this ongoing war in several places, like both Afghanistan and in Iraq, with the threat that it may spread to Iran. And the markets now are starting to react, because we have paid for it temporarily by borrowing money and by inflating. That is, literally, we have permitted our Federal Reserve to create money to buy Treasury bills in order to pay these bills. But that doesn't work. That's just a delay in payment. The eventual payment comes when the dollar gets weak and prices go up and markets get shaky, and we're still starting to see the beginning of a real serious shakeout with the nervousness that we're seeing on Wall Street today.
Do you remember in 2002 the Deputy Secretary of Defense testifying that the oil sales from Iraqi oil will pay for the war? The revenue-neutral war.
Yeah, and remember Larry Lindsey predicted how much money it might be, and his was a modest prediction, and, of course, he got fired, from the administration. And the general, I think it was Shinseki, that said that we'd need a lot more troops if we really want to win, and, of course, he got set aside. So anybody that tells the truth about the real cost of this war, whether it has to do with money or the number of troops or the quagmire that has occurred, you're not received very well. People don't want to hear the truth if you're trying to do something that the American people actually don't understand or really don't want. So I think that turned out like many had predicted. It wasn't like nobody was, concerned and made predictions that this would be very costly. And that's what's coming about. I mean, the oil's not paying for it, and we're still there, and the billions of dollars that we appropriate are still being spent. There's no end in sight. And, they talk about 3,600 men and women killed over there, but another 1,000 of contractors have been killed. And the wounded are, it's unknown how many wounded and sick we have. They claim maybe 30,000, but there could be twice that many when you look at all the illnesses and the post-traumatic stress syndrome and brain injuries that aren't yet recorded. So it is unbelievable what this cost is going to be, and it's endless, and yet there seems to be no serious attempt by anybody in Washington to change policy.
I'm so glad you mentioned the wounded soldiers. We've seen so many stories about guys with post-traumatic stress disorder told to drink a beer and chin up and be a man and quit complaining. We've seen articles about soldiers who are literally physically wounded who are being told that they have some sort of personality disorder that disqualifies them from medical care. And I know you're an opponent of socialized medicine, but these are American soldiers who've done their duty and are wounded. And it seems like the Bush administration is just turning their back on them.
Yeah, and this is a high responsibility of ours to take care of those men. So I don't put that in the category of socialized medicine. That's a responsibility because our policies have caused these problems to occur. And if something doesn't happen, these numbers are going to continue to grow. And we just saw this week the statistics on suicides on military higher than ever. And this is something which I don't think is surprising. I'm surprised it's not worse, and it's not just being wimpish. It's the fact that governments ask their young people to do things that aren't normal. If you take a normal individual that's a teenager or just past teenage and ask him to turn him into an individual that shoot and kills strangers that he never knew of and have never done any damage or threatened us, it contradicts everything that I think is natural to our psyche. And yet we tell them that we do this in the name of patriotism and saving our Constitution and protecting our liberties, and it's a schizophrenic type of operation. So this produces a lot of stress. In one sense, the government is saying you're a noble hero to go over and kill people. At the same sense, they don't have it in them to do this. And because of that conflict, it leads to depression, which is not abnormal. It to me seems to be a normal reaction for decent people to become depressed over this conflict of interest.
Right, and then the government doesn't want to really acknowledge how bad the problem is with the post-traumatic stress and so forth, because then they have to admit that this is the results of their policy.
They want to hide it, just like they hid the problems of the Agent Orange problems that came out of Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf War syndrome was hidden for a long time, and veterans couldn't get treatment. And now, of course, there's a lot of depleted uranium floating around and laying around over in Iraq, and people are going to get sick from that. It might not be immediate, but maybe in 5 or 10 years, and it'll be hard to measure, and the symptoms will be different for each one, and there'll be cancers caused by this, and our government will stay in denial, and yet we have these hundreds of thousands of people who will be suffering.
Which also brings up the question of our responsibility to the people of Iraq. It's our government that's covered their country. Our guys eventually, hopefully, will leave that place, but their country is going to be covered in depleted uranium dust for how long to come? The indefinite future. It's
morally reprehensible, but it poses a difficult solution. Do you further tax the American people that had nothing to do with the decision-making to pay for this and help these people that we've literally harmed? It would be nice if the justice could be levied against those who promoted the war. If you were a warmonger and you promoted this policy that has led us to such a disaster, it'd be nice if we could require that they personally assume some responsibility. But that, of course, is an impractical proposal.
Sounds nice, though. Sure does. All right, well, you've said before, we just marched in, we can just march out. And you know the War Party's talking point number one is that, no, Dr. Paul, we cannot do that because things will get worse. Do you think that that's right, that things will get worse? And you're saying that, well, we're not going to be able to make it better anyway, so if things get worse now, they'll still get worse if we leave 10 years from now? Or are you saying that there's a chance things will get better if we leave?